See Asher's. So speaking of meeting notes, if you go to our GitHub page, you can also see all of the meeting notes or the website code itself. A couple people have asked where to go contribute. That's where you can go. So the identifier for all of our stuff is full stack TC, whether it's Twitch, YouTube, GitHub, or so keep that in mind. We do have a Twitter page, just to keep that in mind. And as of last month, we kind of received a little bit of sponsorship, so thank you so much for Wildlands for sponsoring us. Of course, Fuse for the facility, and Wheelhouse for providing us with beverages. That was really nice of them. So with that, I think we are actually going to form a 501c3 just to kind of become a little more official and to be able to do stuff in the future. So we'll have more of that possibly next month. Hopefully I'll have some more official news in that capacity, but that's pretty exciting. So I'm going to try and have like a inspirational slide from now on because I really want to kind of drive the point home. So this month I'm going to say, in learning you will teach, and in teaching you will learn. And if you don't know that song, you should YouTube that song on your way home, because that's from Tarzan. That's an incredible movie, an even better song. But I find it very true. So that was kind of the passion behind this whole thing, right? If you want to get better at something, teach someone else, and you will yourself grow. Next month is open for presentation if you want to talk. However, I think somebody wanted to give a talk on Git possibly, and I was thinking about giving a talk on AWS. Anybody be interested in AWS talk? Like, okay, probably a high level talk, but I think I want to do an intro to Amazon Web Services. Sorry, it's not Azure.
It's cool. I'm going to do one on Google Cloud Platform.
Could somebody open the door in the back? Oh, never mind. All right, so before Joe comes up to speak, I actually was hoping everybody could take turns introducing themselves, but more specifically, if you could describe yourself in 3 hashtags, what would they be? So give us your name, kind of what you do, and the 3 hashtags about yourself. So I guess I'll go first, and I should have thought about this in advance. So I got to do it on the spot, but coincidentally, refactoring is actually a big passion of mine in code, so hashtag refactoring, I guess. I am a big fan of cloud, so hashtag AWS. And the third one I'm trying to think, I will have one by the end of the talk today, so. All right, who's next, Chad?
Sure, name and then what I do, or just?
Yeah, just who you are, I guess.
Yeah, so name's Chad Singh, software developer, and hashtag I don't like hashtags. Hashtag
that's one.
Communication, and hashtag teamwork.
Cool. Joe?
I'm Joe Weakley. I'm also a software developer. I would think hashtag coding, hashtag outdoors, hashtag games.
I'm Eric Golfman. I'm the team architect at LiveTiles. I suppose for the purposes of this meetup, I'm required to say hashtag developer, hashtag Microsoft, hashtag hiring.
Sean Hathaway, I'm really student engineering right now, but hashtag still not the coding, hashtag monitor, hashtag
My name is Evan. I was a student at UC. 3 hashtags that would describe me. Hashtag not a developer. Hashtag band nerd. Hashtag
Marvin. I hate hashtags too. Yeah, you know my thing. What is it with you kids and your hashtag everything?
It's a fun way to describe yourself.
Hashtag.
Back in my day, what do we know? I don't have to go with that. I'm a half-assed developer, Python and assembly.
I'm Ken Schmidt. I'm a high-performance computing engineer at P&L. Hashtag, I guess, hashtag supercomputing, hashtag Linux, and hashtag Python.
Nice, thank you.
Good job.
Trevor can refer to it as pound still, so he's allowed to.
Yeah, found or an HTML head topic, how's that? Or keywords.
Comment sign. All right, so with that, Joe,
DJing in the corner.
thank you. What's
That
that?
guy DJing in the corner.
Oh yeah, who's
What are
that
his
guy?
hashtags?
What are your hashtags?
Hashtag AV, hashtag streaming, hashtag development.
Okay, that was quick.
Hashtag there's weird background music. So
Should be showing. Yay! So I'm Joe Weakley. I'm a developer over at Wildland, and I'm going to talk about refactoring today. So does anybody know what refactoring is? Does anybody want to say what they think refactoring is, or their definition? Okay. Anybody else?
fixing all the crap you did before in a better way.
Also completely acceptable.
Changing the structure without changing the behavior.
That's the technical definition, and that's actually, that's the definition I'm going to use. So it's changing the structure without changing the behavior, and it's kind of why would you go through the trouble of rewriting code if it's not changing any of the behavior? And typically you're going to do refactoring to either make it more readable, abstract things out, so kind of clean things up and reuse it, or you're going to, you know, just in general, kind of hopefully find less bugs, clean up some old stuff. On open source projects, it's actually kind of nice to go through and refactor because usually you're reducing complexity, and it allows other people to be able to more easily contribute to your code base as well. When you want to refactor, when do you guys, do any of you wake up and you're like, oh man, I know that user class is, okay, so we got a few. So at Wildland, we typically don't do that. We're usually trying to be a little bit more lean, and we usually kind of clean up as we go. And that's how I like to refactor. Very rarely, usually I know where the hot spots in the code are. I'll be like, oh, I don't want to look at that section of code today. We'll save that for next sprint type thing. But typically how I like to refactor, or when I like to refactor, is when I'm in the file, and if I'm touching the method or in the file itself, usually I'll try and clean it up. That's kind of a newer thing I've been trying. And it's kind of somewhere between those two extremes, you know, touch it as you get to it, or, you know, set aside a whole day and clean up that thing that's really been bugging you. So we're going to get to some code. Wrote this last night. It is a little guy who takes a collection of invoices and runs some reports on them. So it's in Ruby. It's not too bad. You guys can ask questions, or you know, as they pop up, or if you see something that's broken or something like that. I'm going to do the thing that I think I said last time not to do, which is live code. But the first thing I'm going to do is let's check out some tests. So this is, I had some changes. So the first thing, get stash. So this secret step 0 to refactoring is actually having test coverage. So since I'm a cool 1X developer, I actually can just do git checkout tests, and then I'll have some tests. So I can show you guys those. Is that big enough for you guys? You see? You Mike?
That one's big enough, but the text is on the other side of the file.
Oh, the file tree? There's two files. There's only two files. There's this guy, which is all the tests, which I can go through and explain if we want, but we're not really going to be hopefully filling a ton with that. And then the actual code itself. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start a thing called guard that's just going to watch my code and run tests as we go. So it just sits there, and then what it'll do is if I save this, it's just watching. It'll run my tests, and this is what we see: happy, fun, green, everything's passing. So typically, if I was to say come into this file and I need to clean it up, I kind of start skimming, and usually one of the first things I look for is kind of like duplicate code. So you can kind of see, I see this guy, I see this guy. So I've got some repetitive code here, and typically for me, I like refactoring if it hits 3. If I see the same chunk of code 3 times, I don't like doing it at 2 very often, because it's just, some people are like, if you write it twice, you know, you should abstract it out into a method or something, but in practice, I find 3 a little bit easier. And for this guy, so it's kind of like it looks like we're getting a range of these guys. So let's make a method that does that. So let's see, invoices for range. So we'll just get invoices for a range. And what we'll do is we'll take this chunk, toss them down here. Since we have all of these variables, we can do that. They're all just instance variables. And now we can rewrite this, if it'll cooperate, to invoices for range. We don't need this chunk anymore. And then we can go down here, do that. We don't need this chunk anymore. Do this. Don't need this chunk anymore. And because I don't really want to test this guy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make him a private method. Typically, you only need to test the public interface, since that's what most people are going to be interacting with in your code. And then I can go back over here. All our tests are green, so that's good. And there's another kind of weird thing going on here. You can see that this invoice report is really, really concerned about this internal state of invoice, which is kind of weird. Really, it should be asking it, kind of, you know, hey, are you in this range? And so we can kind of rewrite that. So that's kind of the next spot that I see. So rather than have this, I'm going to write the code that I wish it worked. So invoice dot in range, and then we'll pass it a start date and an end date. So instead of having this, and this is kind of how I like to refactor, I kind of write the code that I wish was there and then kind of get it to that point. So to do that, I'll need to come over here, and then I need to make in range. So I have to define the method down here. End date. And then all I have to do is kind of invoice stat. And so the reason I'm kind of doing this is it makes it easier to manage invoice when, rather than open up some other object and kind of peek around and try and figure out what it should be doing, it's better to tell it, hey, you know, are you in range? And then give it the pieces that it needs to figure out kind of what's going on. So I grab this. Oh, I don't need this. And so that kind of makes this code a little bit easier to reason about. So what it does is to figure out the invoices that are in range. I go through each one of them and select all the ones where the invoice is in range. Everybody kind of following along so far? Now, does anybody see one funky thing going on here? What was that?
Data form?
Yep, exactly. So a data clump is a set of variables that are kind of necessary for each other. So in this case, having a start date without an end date doesn't necessarily make any sense. Like, you need both of them. And kind of the more arguments you're passing into the method, the more tightly coupled these two chunks are together. So what, oh.
Is your test passing formula?
No.
Okay.
That's actually a great point.
I was just going to mention that maybe your start date and end date, your in-range is
Thank you. These guys. And nice. Thank you, Chad. So that's the other nice thing about having tests when you're refactoring. It's kind of a nice safety net to make sure that you are in fact not changing behavior. So data clump. So start date and end date kind of are stuck together. So I'm going to make a class date range, or have tab kind of screw stuff up. And then I'll make some accessors, start date, end date. And then what we'll do is we'll start the other way, which is go to the test, since we're kind of changing this. And I'll start over here. If you guys have any questions about this test, this is our spec. This is typically what we test our Ruby code in. So
Is it basically just running against a known set of calling the functions with a known set of values and looking for a known expected
Yep.
output?
So all this up here, all of these lets, I'm kind of setting up my expectations. So I'm going to make date range. So I kind of set up everything right here. Date range new. Pass these in.
You're basically just writing a script of calls.
Yeah. So
Find the output.
Yep, so what it is I set up all this data with these lets, and then I describe this method. The context, I have a single invoice, and then right here is the expectation. So I expect if I have a single unpaid invoice, the outstanding should be 100. If I have a set of them, so I have like a valid invoice, an unbilled invoice, so I pass on a collection of stuff. Should be this, and it's kind of all the way down is that. So I've got those three methods right here. So that's all I'm doing for the testing. So I've got these date ranges, and now we can pass that in, down, up. I pass it in here. Pass date range into there, and then all my tests should be failing. If I can get back to them. So they're going to be mad because it's given 2 instead of 1. So I forgot to put an initializer on here. Start date, end date. Start date, end date. Back. Should be giving me the error I expect now. Oh, up top. So I'm kind of letting the test help me out. So right here, we can't do start date, end date anymore. Instead, it's date range. And this guy becomes date range. And then, let's see, I just have to change this guy. So that's the last one. So, date range. And now we should be back to green? No. What does it matter about? In range, given one, expected to. I forgot to change the definition of this down here. So I have to kind of weave this new data clump all the way through. So this happens sometimes when you're refactoring the code. You're like, you have to kind of trace as you go through, make sure everything kind of gets caught up. Okay. So now we should be back. Okay, so now we're back to green. So I've got date range now, and it makes this a little bit easier to kind of read and reason about now. So the invoice, rather than be a collection of invoices and the start date, end date, you're giving the report invoices and you're giving it a date range, and then it's going to run these different, total outstanding for the date range, total billed for the date range. So it kind of makes it a little bit easier to kind of read. Everybody kind of following along so far? Okay. So after that, so we still have this. So this behavior, really we could put it on date range. It's kind of like a nice place to put it. So rather than this guy kind of in the same vein, opening up date range and figuring stuff out, maybe it would make more sense to say date range contains, includes. Sometimes when you're refactoring, figuring out the names is the hardest part. So does it contain a date range? Or contain date? We are the date range. And then kind of come down here, so I would go date range dot contains invoice stat, and then kind of come back up here. So kind of making date range a little bit smarter. I give it a date and it just straight up tells me, hey, yes or no. Rather than kind of the same thing where you're opening up some other object to figure stuff out, just send it the data and let it do the work. So for this, I can do start date, end date, include date. So this is just this right here is a Ruby range. I just make a range out of dates, and then I can ask it if it includes the date. So that kind of makes this a little bit easier to kind of read and reason about. In range, does the date range contain my invoice stat? Rather than kind of this Boolean, which isn't necessarily as clear. You kind of have to read through, you're like, okay, invoice stat greater than start date, and I typically don't like having this just hanging out here. I actually would kind of consider this kind of like magic number, which is where you've got this thing with no context. This means something. So since it means something, we might as well give it a name and a method. And really this means, hey, is this included inside this date range? So that kind of cleans it up. We'll go back and check our tests. They're still green. So let's see, it's looking pretty good, but we still have some kind of gnarly stuff. It's not really super complex conditional, but it's still kind of this conditional that has some sort of meaning. In this case, let's see, this is really what we're trying to say here, invoice.outstanding. So then I have to go down, and we'll add that method there. And then let's see, outstanding we're billed, but we haven't received payment. So Build and not payment received. So that kind of makes that a little bit easier to reason about rather than this. It's not necessarily clear to everybody. You might have to come in and ask or kind of be like, what is this? This is a little bit clearer. It's like, oh, the invoice is outstanding. And you see as we start cleaning this up, this starts to read a little bit easier. You know, okay, so we grab the invoices from range, and then if we have those, we pick the ones that are outstanding. And then, well, we got this. We'll clean this up in a sec. I think we've got another guy right here. Similar kind of thing where it's like, what we want really is invoice dot received money. So we're just kind of moving stuff around into spots that kind of make it a little bit easier for us to kind of reason about, or otherwise, you know, really other chunks of code aren't going to really care necessarily about all of these internals. A lot of the times you're going to be like, you know, did the invoice receive money? That's how most clients are going to talk. If I was working on this project for somebody and they were like, I want to see a report on money received, you don't necessarily want to have to go in and figure out what the exact state is. We might as well give it a name so it's easier to kind of work with. So that kind of helps that. Let's see. What other stuff can we kind of clean up? So we've got this instance variable, but that's kind of okay. This guy looks like it is a duplicate. So let's see. What is this doing? So it looks like we are getting total hours and rate, and then we're adding them together. So maybe what we want to do is take that and give it a name. So it looks like it's just total cost. Total cost sounds okay. Total cost. Let's try this. So this is kind of what I was saying before, where it's like, this is a big gnarly thing and you have to kind of sit here and reason about what's going on. And instead of doing that, let's just give it the name of what's happening. And then we can just kind of reference that. So we kind of shove all the thinking behind it, behind a method name. So I'd go down here. What do I call that? Total cost. And we give it some invoices. The other nice thing is, because we're doing it this way, you know, we don't necessarily have to test this. This isn't a public method. And then we can kind of, because they all do the same thing, rather than copy paste, maybe we had a bug inside of this or something, it's all in one place now. So we could do something like this. It's nice, we get to delete a bunch of code. Kind of the less code we're writing, the less bugs we can write. Let's see. And we will double check that I haven't broken everything. We haven't broken everything. And so then it kind of chops these methods down. In general, I found that having smaller methods makes things easier to reason about. Depending on, some liners actually pay attention to them. Things like, there's a Ruby one called Rubocop. I think it'll give you a warning out of the box at 10 methods per line. I've heard some people say your method shouldn't be more than like one method, I think, or one line. That's kind of crazy. But in general, if you can keep the methods shorter, they're just easier to work with. You can kind of keep breaking them down into more and more methods. So. That's kind of all I can see
I presume you don't take a performance hit in Ruby for that?
for having the method change like that.
Well, yeah, because this is almost like you're creating piles of functions. I mean, am I reflecting this to the languages I know correctly?
I could run the tests. These tests aren't benchmarks, but they do time themselves. I don't think.
Well, you may not, I guess you may not see it here, but at a certain point, you know, because it seems like this is very much an example, a nice concise example. At a certain point, are you not getting a performance hit from all these calls? I mean, internally, is the thing making a stack call for each one of these methods?
It probably is, and there probably is certain points where you might hit that. But I think the trade-off in general of having this easier to work with for the human
Yeah.
is probably the more default. Yeah, the more default use case. And when you run into performance issues, you know, rather than pre-optimize for those kind of things, it's easier to pre-optimize for whoever has to come by 6 months, 3 months down the road.
Frequently Ruby doesn't have, or especially with Rails, doesn't have a lot of computation in it. It's usually gluing the network to a database and just having a few calls between. So it usually doesn't take a big hit for having a lot of functions.
Okay.
In my experience, refactoring usually unwind loops, improve performance by itself,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So you should see performance gains.
Yeah, and then depending, like if I compress this, so we had this in 3 different spots. It was all calculating total cost. If we found a hotspot, the nice thing about doing it this way, actually I think this one, contain. I think it's contain. It's not contain, it's contains. No. I thought range had that. I think there's one for ranges where include instantiates everything between, and there's another, covers, that's what it is. Covers? I'm trying to remember. Cover? Cover. Okay. So this is like, this one rather than instantiate everything in between the range and then see, covers one that it goes here and here and kind of does a calculation to see if it's in between. But if I had that split all over the place, it would have been one of the things where maybe one section of code, something that's very user-facing, has that bug in it where it's slow. I change it there, and then only that spot gets the performance hit, or the performance bump, where by compartmentalizing into the methods, everywhere gets it. Yeah. Any?
Into a hotspot, you can then target
Yeah.
spreading it out or notice it.
Yeah, and depending on deadlines and things or what projects you're working on, sometimes, I mean, these are just kind of code smells that I've been seeing frequently. But I mean, they're just that, like, you don't always need to optimize them. And sometimes it's not worth your time to optimize them either, or do some of the refactoring. It just depends on what's going on, but yeah. Anything else? Does anybody see anything else I can clean up? I think I grabbed everything. I kind of threw this together last night and tried to leave a bunch of sloppy code in here, so I don't know. Did anybody have any other questions on Ruby or any other stuff I was playing with? I know I kind of skimmed over stuff all over the place, but.
So you're optimizing the code to make it both less prone to errors and easier to read. There's a tipping point though, it seems like when you could take it too far and your refactor actually becomes harder to read but maybe more performant.
You could do that. I would think most of the time, at least like what we were doing here, where we're moving stuff around, which is most of what we were doing. We were moving things into methods and then putting the methods into the correct spot. I mean, it's more of like a housekeeping type thing than the performance thing. I mean, you could get into that scenario. I think you would notice it though. And stuff like this is more of, like the more you pair with other people, or we do code reviews. So in order for a chunk of code to get back into master, somebody who didn't author the code has to sign off on it. And so you kind of see how other people approach things. Actually, code reviews and pair programming is a great way to get better at refactoring too. Because you'll just see people write things in different ways, or like things like cover is like a weird thing that I hadn't seen before. And it's like, oh, most of the time you actually want this and not the other thing. So I think you would notice, because as you kind of write more and more code, you start getting a feel for, okay, this seems more natural, or this reads better, or you'll get maybe, you're like, oh, I wrote it that way before, and I had all these bugs. I remember I had to come back and clean it up. So part of it is just the more you code. And it helps to go between languages too, because different languages do things different ways. Like Ruby has a lot of built-in data structures and stuff, and you're like.
So I guess if you wanted to take that code and say, okay, I'm going to build a select by, and I'm going to pass it some kind of function that tells you how to take an item and grab it. You could be crossing a line.
Yes. If you were rewriting, yeah, like if I went in and tried to re-implement my own map or something like that.
So like you scroll up a little bit, you'll see kind of the repetitive code there. Your valid invoices, you select it, and you kind of you're selecting by a certain function of the object. So you could rewrite that as like select by, and give it some kind of.
So something like select by, and then maybe like a block or something. Yeah, you could.
Something where you're saying, oh, let me get it.
Merge those two functions together.
Yeah, they're definitely, yeah, you could definitely go down a rabbit hole doing that kind of stuff, where you're trying to share too much code or genericize stuff too much. Yeah, because I see what you're saying here, where you're like, okay, well, I've got invoice by range. I guess technically I could, rather than have this, write a method that is outstanding invoices for range. So, I could do something like this, and I could hide that inside of that method. And then I could do the same thing for this, give this a name. So you could keep doing that.
Actually, I noticed that a lot of times when you've gone too far in factoring, you realize functioning of things have gone too long. It's something else. But it also does as well.
So with long method names and long variable names, I typically don't worry about those, just because under the hood, the computer is going to change them to like.
But from the human interface perspective of the developer, it's like, this is getting too specific now at some point possibly. But
Yeah.
And you're trying to remember the function name that you typed last time.
Function has already gone past the 80 characters.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a ruler out here on my guy that tells me, hey, you're getting too long. So, yeah, naming is definitely really hard sometimes. But anything else? Any other weird quirks that other people have had with refactoring recently, or?
I will say that I come from the very bizarre world of like very robust IDEs, and we have a lot of graphical refactoring tools. They are not going to make you good at refactoring. They're just going to make you so you can do good things faster.
So, oh.
Is your idea refactors of code for your own race?
Yeah, let's do both. A handful of things like it will constantly be scanning the code, and like when it has, like when he gets a linter, when things where he might get a linter error, I'll get a linter error, but then it will immediately be like click, click, and it'll fix it. And then the other thing you could have just like a very basic one is you can just highlight a set of code and you go Control RM, and then it'll just extract the method for you, and then you rename it in place, and then you can do Control RR and start renaming things automatically.
And there's
lots of really good stuff too about, you know, you start something, and if it's undefined, you can either, it will smart check, is there something with a similar name, and it will suggest that. If not, you can immediately have it instantiate a class over start a class or start a config that is that thing.
I'm sure there's plugins for Atom's what I'm using.
Yeah.
I know one thing that I could use, if I pop up another one, for linter type refactoring, that RuboCop I was talking about. RuboCop. So it's actually kind of mad about some stuff, but it comes with a -A, which is autocorrect. And so it went through and fixed 42 of the style offenses that I did.
So they use RubyMine as well as for you that you talked about.
What was that? The RuboCop does some of it.
RubyMine does a lot of what you said.
Oh, okay.
For Ruby.
So is that IDE then?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's also a linter plugin for Atom that'll have RuboCop running
Oh,
built in.
that's what these dots are on the side. It's mad about stuff. So, and having linters and stuff also kind of helps because some of these things, so if I go back, so it knew, hey, fold this up, you're just asking a single thing. So little things like that. Using tools definitely makes your life easier. So, and Visual Studio does have a lot of really neat stuff.
It has a lot built in, and the .NET community for Sharper is very popular. But that's even more stuff.
Just curiosity, I'm not familiar with this like at all, but I'm seeing a turn that's happening where you sort of, it processes chunks, but it doesn't usually handle that value information when it can see in this code.
For
The last
Yep.
line.
The value of the last line is what.
Oh, yeah, they auto return the last time. That's, yeah, if it's doing essentially that under the hood. And it actually, redundant return. Usually don't do it unless you're doing some sort of like, return if, some big error. You'll see stuff like this under like a guard clause. But, yeah. Any other questions about refactoring or Ruby or?
So one really common thing I saw was our interns especially was heavy use of else.
Mm.
Like if something returned A, if else returned B, it's like your else is kind of redundant there. Just, do the if and that's it, and return and that's it. And that's like a little tiny one that I saw a lot of interns especially.
Yeah, I had that one as well. I think it's usually never easy to process the multiple process change or all.
So
That's usually the
So they have something where it's like if, this something. Yeah.
Now, I will argue for that slightly in terms of readability, because when I first look at it, it's kind of like, it looks like that bottom one is always going to happen, but if you put it in the else, then you automatically know, either no, it's going to be one or the other.
After a while, it tends to be also after a while, I found that having also was more distracting than not having it.
Okay.
So there is, there's a, depending on the context, sometimes you'll have something where if something dot exists, you'll have this like a null pattern. Sometimes you'll have that, and you can, do something else by default. I think, I'm trying to remember the pattern. I think it's called like a null object pattern. If they're bumping into something like that where you're constantly checking, hey, is this thing around or not? You can make a default object that responds to the same thing. And then you just, let's say we do this, name. A pattern like this, you could do something where when you're instantiating, you make like a default something. And it does this, so you don't have to constantly do this if else check too. But.
For what it's worth, another part of refactoring for me has been going back and writing the comments that I should have wrote the first time around.
I find comments really, really helpful if if this doesn't accurately describe what's going on, it's like, you know, this has some really gnarly edge case that only processes once if it's a blue moon on a Wednesday, and you know, yeah, it's helpful for those kind of things.
That's it, since we're getting wildland, before you would start the definition of a function or something, you describe the variables and what was going to happen with them. But since I've been working on wildland, I don't see that very much. Instead, you see long drawn out variable names that describe what it's doing, kind of 2D orders. Maybe not too long, but fairly long. So,
Yeah, we do lean more on that side of stuff. If you look in some of our open source stuff, it's the same way. But, yeah, naming is definitely gnarly sometimes. Especially if you internally call something A, but when you're talking to like an end user or something, it's B. Those kind of things get really confusing. So.
I saw kind of an old pattern recently, for a while ago actually, with Ruby ERB files. They were checking for a user's state, logged in or not, constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the exact thing they did, but I think one of the hacks they did was basically like just return HTML
Oh.
to the class itself. That just writes out the code that they were constantly putting everywhere. It's kind of ugly, but it reduced duplication by crap time for them. And that was a quick fix.
Yeah, on web apps, logged in user is a big one. But you can make it so that it's either current user, but if that's not defined, you just return some object that's basically identical, and it's like anonymous user or something, and then you don't have to do all those checks for existence.
Right. Yeah.
So.
I want to comment about, so when to refactor. I know you mentioned refactor as you go along or you're touching about.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually very common for me to refactor at the start of doing something. To be very specific, I'll make my branch a feature. I will then do one set of refactoring that is going to simplify implementing the feature. I'll do that as one check-in. And then I will do the changes that actually implement the feature, and then I'll do that as one check-in. And then it actually makes it so there's been moments where they'll be like, oh, I'm working on that too, and then they just pull across the first one. Or it's a little bit, it's not terribly complicated in our system to do that. I don't know what it does.
You can cherry pick.
Yeah, but it's compared to letting a technical debt build up and then blow up when you're like a week later remembering this in. It can be helpful. Still not great.
So that goes along with the famous template growth, right? Make the change an easy one, make it easy change.
Yeah, and the second part's hard.
Yeah.
First part's hard.
First part.
Yeah, but it's kind of like show us in your kitchen for your kitchen. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I find myself doing it kind of without thinking if I'm in, especially if like I'm in a method and I see some of those things where it's like, oh, this means something. I'll start just plucking out, especially if I do something where I make it private, not part of the public interface of the object, then I know I don't have to go back and rewrite tests necessarily. So.
I can say this, by being private, you're saying your code checking suite does not process it?
Correct. I'm not exposing this out to an external object.
Isn't that inherently just publicly introducing errors? Because you can make an error from there, just regarding how you transpose the data in the initial process. And
I could.
black boxes, right?
So I could, but really the main thing I'm concerned with are these public interfaces. The fact that they consume this under the hood, like the bug may be in here, but the bug should pop up when I'm testing the public interfaces.
The other thing is, if you have a private method and it's not used anywhere, you should get something that pops up that says unused method. So you get full coverage as long as you do it in public.
Mm-hmm. So.
Or you need
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually can happen where you're just like, oh,
I work in that. Well,
this got deprecated a million years ago. No one bothered to remove it. But yeah, so. Anything else? I know we haven't really been using Guard. I've been using it lately. I've been having to write a lot of tests at work, And guard is really nice because for our stack, it'll run just the specific tests that are bumped in. So if I change one file, it doesn't run the whole test suite. It just runs, there's pattern matching. So it can be kind of nice. And I broke something. But, oh, I think it was this. I broke that. Okay. And I'll make a git commit. So, yep. I guess if no one has any other questions or anything, that's it.
Excellent.
So we kind of have time left over. Does anybody have like anything they've been stuck on at work or problem they want to like brainstorm? Any refactoring they want questions on? That's it. So hopefully Joe can make this available on GitHub.
Actually, I can send it. It is on GitHub. That's where I pushed it up to.
Okay, cool.
I can send it over to you guys if you want. We can just put it on.
The full stack GitHub or?
Yeah, we put it on full stack.
Yeah. That'd be cool if you could do like the before and after, and then we can people can compare.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything? Yeah.
So as a student starting out, what programming language would you encourage them to learn first and learn well? Like, as for me, I've done a little bit with C# and with Java, but I don't really know which programming language I should really dive into and get to know really, really well.
I can start a war.
You.
Depends what you work with, you said?
I can answer if you want.
Sure.
What do you want to do?
What do you want to do with your life? Yeah.
There,
Trying to Python courses, academy, is actually an advantage to starting out.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I first programmed in BASIC, I then went for an electrical engineering degree and had to take things that I never really snapped about before I programmed.
Yeah, you can just do
in
full
C and C++,
press.
and it just looked like a mess to me, and finally it was when I finally did Python, was forced into it, it made sense, and then for me, it was done, everything I needed to do that I haven't bothered moving on was C and C++.
oh, there you guys
But I
are.
think the best question nowadays really is.
I don't think I can do a reverse fork.
Python is a good general, hit a whole pile of things. Language, whereas,
Yeah, because I want to fork it from mine onto yours. I think you
Oh, you
guys
have it in
would.
your GitHub?
Yeah.
So what you can do is go here. Meetup notes. I don't know if I made one for today or not. I didn't. But if you click on August, for example, or go back. That's September. August.
August, right here.
So Asher just linked to his.
Oh, I could just give you guys the whole repo if you wanted.
Yeah, if you do that, I can just link it in there.
Yeah, I'll give you guys the repo here if you want.
They publish a.
Yeah, I can move it into there. Oh, no, I'll just link to yours.
Oh, okay.
That's a question of
Okay, I'll just send you guys. Should
I think you
select
put the,
Kevin?
you put the URL in there. I'll just grab it.
Do you put? Do you need it again? Okay, you're scripted. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes though they were doing it based on jobs and all that, so you may also want to look at, job availability numbers.
Yeah, they also have a job site.
Yeah.
And I think they have, data scientists do vision research, so they put out pushing crazy stuff.
And just ignore all that, just learn Unity.
Yeah. Unity is a big deal.
If you've got somebody you know that if you have not really like a mentor, but like somebody you know that is programming better than you and you want to program like them, and you can ask them questions, whatever language they like is another good way, because then you can actually bug them and ask them questions, because that's
Literally have a language in common.
yep.
On a related note, I took Spanish in high school because my mom was a Spanish teacher. Even though I wanted to take Japanese.
That is somehow unrelated.
No, it's related because see, you're taking something where you got people around, you can bug with questions, right, Jim?
Right. So that is a good approach. You'll probably learn multiple languages throughout the course of your career, but
But I think also finding a template language something that matter regarding changing because of problems, because a lot of concepts scale on itself. It's what the platform category.
yeah. Like all the code smells he just talked about today, all of those you'll see in every language. It's language agnostic, right? Those problems persist no matter where you're at. Like, it's probably 20% syntax, 80% wisdom, I guess. What do you want to call it?
Wisdom or the standard libraries. You'll go into a language and it does have the standard libraries you want.
Yeah.
And then you have to go figure out how to get array or something.
Another refactoring, an interesting other position or consideration is the issue of libraries. When you include a library for starting yourself, the complexity, because sometimes libraries do one or two functions might include 4,000 lines of code relative to the components. Like if you're just processing mind headers, for example. You don't want to have to worry about dealing with like SMTP, just dealing with mind and just simple HTML blocks. So
See, in the Python world, we go from something and import just the pieces we need.
As opposed to like JavaScript, where you were complaining about jQuery earlier, where it's like, there's people who bring down jQuery using the function.
Yeah, and just, the one example is like, I don't even have an HTML parser just to write a line handler, but there's 2,000 lines about parsing HTML just to build a line boundary or something like that. But that's another interesting issue, which is related, I think, to backend conceptually. Like when you include a whole bulk of one or two components.
Jim, I only do it when it comes up on the GitHub start repos list, and then I go, holy shit, somebody already made this.
It's a good question, though. Any others? No? All right. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Next meetup is November 7th. And if you want to give a talk, submit a form. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll find someone else. And in December, we're going to do, like we did last year, trying to go do something fun. Go eat and drink somewhere afterwards. Last year, we toured LIGO. Try and do something different this year. Choices are kind of limited in the Tri-Cities, but I'm sure we'll find something. So I'll get back to you on that. Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody.
That's not for you.